Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this one, we're going to be looking at straight line graphs, which is basically chapter number 7. Okay, so before we start the chapter, you need to learn a few things. So let's look at them. So the first one is the distance formula. We can find the distance formula if we know the coordinates of 2 points. So if we have that, then we can find the distance between those 2 points. Okay, so if you apply this formula, d equals the square root of x2 minus x1 whole square plus y2 minus y1 whole square, you will get the distance between 2 points. If you think about this, it actually makes sense, you know. Okay, let's actually derive this. So let's say um, this is d, and let's draw the x and y axis. So what would this be? This would be the x, right? And this would be the y, where y equals y2, let's say y1 minus y2, and x equals to x1 minus x2. Because we're just finding the difference. So this one would be x, this is x2, this is x1, so the coordinates. So yeah, we know that x squared plus y squared equals to d squared, which is the Pythagoras theorem, which you may have learned in like 5th grade. So yeah, so d would be the square root of x squared plus y squared. That's true, right? So since this is a right angle triangle, and where x is x2, x1 minus x2, and y is y1 minus y2. So if we substitute that back into this equation, we get the same thing that we wrote on the slide. So that's how this is derived. It's pretty simple. So if you want to find the distance between 2 points, you use this formula. You could honestly use the Pythagoras theorem, but since you directly know what this is, this would be simpler. Okay, next we're gonna look at the midpoint formula. So if you have 2 points and you want to find the midpoint between them, you essentially have to add the x coordinates, divide them by 2, add the y coordinates, divide them by 2. So that's very simple, you know. If it's basically like finding the average, the midpoint of 2 points. So yeah, you're essentially finding the average of the x coordinates and the average of the y coordinates, and then you separate them by a comma, like yeah. So this would be the midpoint here, and the midpoint of this line would be here. So these two were pretty simple. Let's move on. So now let's look at another important concept, which is gradients. You might have learned this as rise over run. So, but it's actually the change in y by change in x. So if it passes through the coordinates of a and b, the gradient of this would be the change in y, which is basically y2 minus y1, divided by the change in x, which is x2 minus x1. And also make sure you don't write y2 minus y1 divided by x1 minus x2, because that will mean something completely different. So make sure that these two are the same and these two are the same, of the same point, I mean. Okay, so now that's clear. Let's look at a few more things. Make sure you know that if two lines are parallel, then their gradients must be equal. So if these two lines are parallel, then the gradients must be equal, meaning the change in y by change in x throughout the whole line will be the same for both. So that's pretty simple. Now let's move on to the second point. So if two lines are perpendicular, meaning that they form like right angles, here, 4 right angles, that means the gradient will be the negative reciprocal of each other. So yeah, so if this is a line with gradient m, the gradient of its perpendicular line will be the negative reciprocal of m. So 1 by m is the reciprocal, and the negative reciprocal would be negative 1 by m. So this is what we get. So if two lines are perpendicular, the gradient will be the negative reciprocal. This is very important to know, this and this, so make sure you don't forget them. Okay, moving on, let's talk about the equations of straight line graphs. So the equation of a straight line is an equation which connects the x and y values for every point on the line. Okay, now I'll show you something. So if we find the equation of this line, every single coordinate that we find on this line will satisfy the equation. So that's what we mean by this statement. Okay, the equations can be written in two ways. The first one is the gradient intercept form, which is in the form of y equals mx plus c, where the gradient is m and the y-intercept is c. You know what y-intercept is, right? So it's basically when the value of x equals to 0 and the value of y will be something, which is c. So yeah, so it will be y equals to mx plus c. You'll use this very frequently, y equals to mx plus c. So I remember that. And then the other one is the general form, which is ax plus by equals to c. So you have to write x and y on the same side, and the constant must be on the other hand side. So yeah, and a, b, and c are constants. Okay, now that we know what equations of a straight line graphs are and how we can represent them, let's actually find out how to actually solve them. So there isn't really one way you can follow. It's just all about intuition and like the things that we know about the line. We honestly have to derive it. There'll be actually a lot of ways to solve them, a lot of information given, but you'll have to see which is the most apt one and then choose. But then there are 2 points here. We'll see what they are. So we can find the equation of a line if we know its gradient and the coordinates of any point on the line, or the coordinates of two distinct points on the line. So don't restrict yourself to just these 2 points. You just have to intuitively know what to do in order to find the equation of the line. Doesn't always necessarily have to be that you have to know the gradient and the coordinates of one of any point on the line, or two distinct points. It's all about like how you think and like how you can actually derive the equation rather than just like following the steps. So if a straight line has gradient m and passes through the point x1 comma y1, then its equation is this. So how do we know this? It's the gradient formula, and then we can just cross multiply, so we get this one. And then if you like simplify it, then you can write in the form of y equals to mx plus c. But right now we won't do that because this is much simpler, because if we have the gradient m, we can plug in the value here, and then we also know the coordinates of a point. So we can substitute this and then we can find it. So now let's work on this problem. So find in gradient intercept form the equation of the line through negative 1 comma 3 with gradient 5. So let's do that. Okay, so this is what we have, and gradient 5. So let's use the formula m equals to y minus y1 divided by x minus x1. This implies that phi equals y minus 3, because we have the value, divided by x minus of minus 1. So we get 5 equals to y minus 3 divided by x plus 1. Now let's cross multiply it. We get 5x plus 5 equals to y minus 3. So y minus 3 equals to 5x plus 5. And then if we solve this, write in the gradient intercept form, we get 5x plus 8. So this is our final answer in gradient intercept form.